The city lights always looked different from the rooftop of Maya's apartment. Up there, the noise faded into a hum, and the glow of the skyline reflected off the clouds like distant fire. She would often stand there, staring at her reflection in the window. The deep, rich tone of her skin, the wide, set eyes, the tight curls framing her face. In her mind, she imagined herself in magazine covers and runways, walking beneath blinding lights, cameras clicking like applause. But when she looked closer, she saw something else: doubt. Maya had grown up loving fashion. As a little girl, she draped old curtains around herself, posing in front of the cracked mirror in her mother's small bedroom. Her mother used to tell her that beauty was not something she had to earn, that her dark skin was like midnight velvet, rare and endless. But the world outside had not agreed. Her first modeling audition had been 3 years ago. She remembered standing in a long line of girls, all tall, slender, and pale. When it was her turn, the casting director had barely looked up from her clipboard. A single glance, a faint frown, and a cold note on the page. Maya had known before she even walked out that she wouldn't be called back. That day had left a scar she could never quite hide. Not because of rejection. She could handle that. But because of the words she overheard as she left. A voice, casual, dismissive, like someone commenting on the weather. "She's too dark for the look we want. Too dark." Those 2 words had followed her everywhere since. They slipped into her dreams, her doubts, her every failed attempt to start again. She stopped wearing bright colors. She avoided cameras. She smiled less. Each time she tried, she heard those same words echo in her mind, mocking her. Her best friend Layla always tried to convince her to keep pushing, to audition again, to post her photos online, to keep believing in her talent. But Maya couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she took a job at a small cafe downtown. She needed money, yes, but more than that, she needed distance from her dream. Every day, she served lattes and pastries to the kind of people who looked like the ones she used to compete against: polished, confident, effortless. Sometimes, she caught glimpses of modeling ads on customers' phones, glowing faces, perfect smiles, perfect skin. Never skin like hers, but fate has a way of circling back when you least expect it. One evening, as the cafe was closing, a man walked in. He looked rushed, important, the kind of person used to being noticed. He ordered coffee, then paused, watching Maya as she worked. There was something in his eyes that made her uneasy. Not judgment, not interest, but recognition. He left without saying much, but an hour later, a card appeared on the counter with his name: Ethan Hayes, Director, Vivid Agency. Maya stared at it for a long time. She knew the name. Everyone in fashion did. Vivid was one of the top agencies in the country. The very same company that had turned her down years ago. Was it a coincidence? Or fate's cruel sense of humor? The next morning, curiosity got the better of her. She searched his name online and saw photos of runway shows, high-end campaigns, models posing in lavish settings. Among them was a press article titled, "Vivid Search for a New Face of Beauty." A new face. The irony made her laugh bitterly. She was exactly what they'd refused to see as beautiful before. But something shifted inside her. Maybe it was anger, maybe hope, or both. For the first time in years, she picked up her phone, wiped the dust off her old camera, and took a picture of herself. Not smiling, not posing, just staring into the lens as she was. The light from the window kissed her skin, revealing every shade of brown, every glint of gold in her eyes. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't filtered. But it was real. She posted it online, under a simple caption: "Too dark for your standards. Just right for mine." She didn't expect anyone to notice. But within hours, her notifications exploded. Comments poured in. Some cruel, yes, but many kind. People from around the world wrote about how they felt the same way, how they too were told they didn't fit in. Others simply called her beautiful. For the first time, Maya didn't feel invisible. The next day, she arrived at work early, unsure of what to expect. But as soon as she stepped inside, the cafe fell silent. Her co-workers looked at her like she had done something impossible. One of them handed her a tablet. There on the screen was a trending post. Her face, her words shared thousands of times. And among the comments, one stood out. A verified account: Ethan Hayes, Vivid Agency. It said, "Would like to talk." Maya's heart pounded. The same agency that once dismissed her now wanted her attention. But beneath the rush of excitement, something colder stirred: suspicion. What did they want from her now? Was it genuine interest, or a desperate attempt to capitalize on her sudden popularity? Either way, she knew this was her moment. The one she had waited for, feared, and longed for. That night, she stood in front of her mirror again. The same cracked glass, the same reflection. But this time, she didn't look for flaws. She saw strength. Yet deep down, she knew, stepping back into that world would mean facing every ghost that had once broken her. Still, she whispered a silent promise to herself. If they wanted to see her now, they would see everything. Not just her beauty, her power, her truth. The next morning, she walked toward the Viavid agency building, the same one where her dream had once died. But this time, her steps were steady, confident, and as she reached the glass doors, the reflection staring back wasn't a girl searching for approval anymore. It was a woman ready for justice. The building looked taller than she remembered, colder, too. Its glass facade gleamed in the morning light, reflecting the city's perfection back at itself. Maya stood on the sidewalk, her pulse quickening, watching the people who walked in and out. They all looked like they belonged. Sleek, polished, flawless. The kind of beauty that turned heads in every direction but hers. She hesitated at the door, the echo of old memories rising from deep within her. The last time she stood here, she had left with tears in her eyes and the sound of laughter following her down the hallway. That day, she had promised herself she would never return. And yet, here she was. Not as the girl they rejected, but as someone the world had finally noticed. Inside, the lobby was vast and sterile, filled with white marble and mirrored walls. Maya felt every gaze land on her as she walked toward the receptionist's desk. The woman behind the counter smiled politely, her eyes scanning Maya's face before flicking briefly, just briefly, over her skin tone. It was a familiar glance, one that carried unspoken judgment hidden beneath professionalism. But Maya didn't flinch. She gave the woman her name, waited as she made the call, and then followed an assistant up to the 15th floor. The elevator ride was silent except for the soft hum of jazz music. In the reflection of the metal walls, Maya could see her own face, calm, composed, but her fingers trembled at her sides. She wasn't nervous about the meeting. She was nervous about what this meeting meant. Ethan Hayes was waiting for her in a glass-walled office overlooking the skyline. He was just as she'd seen in the photos. Sharply dressed, charming, confident. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. He gestured for her to sit. She did. He began talking about opportunity, about how times had changed, how diversity was the new frontier of the industry. He spoke about how her post had inspired people, how her image had captured something authentic. Every word was polished, rehearsed, the language of business disguised as progress. But beneath the compliments, Maya heard something else. They didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a moment, a trend, a symbol they could use to fix their own image. Still, she listened. She nodded. She let him talk. Because for once, she wanted to hear exactly how they saw her. When he finally finished, Ethan slid a portfolio across the desk. Inside were concept sketches for a new campaign. Real beauty, real people. The irony made Maya's chest tighten. The same company that once decided she wasn't, the look, now wanted to use her face to sell authenticity. She asked what they were offering. He outlined the contract. Photo shoots, press events, interviews. Her image would appear in magazines, online ads, maybe even a billboard. It was everything she had once dreamed of. But there was one catch. They wanted her story. They wanted her pain packaged and marketed. The too dark, rejection, the viral post, the comeback. They wanted to turn her humiliation into their redemption arc. Maya smiled faintly. On the surface, she seemed calm. Inside, her anger simmered, sharp and steady. She told him she'd think about it. When she left the building, the sun hit her face, and for a moment, she couldn't tell if she felt free or trapped again. The city buzzed with life around her, oblivious to the storm inside her chest. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the contract. Her mother's old words whispered through her mind, "Your beauty is not something you have to earn." But maybe now, it wasn't just about beauty. Maybe it was about taking back control. From them, from their standards, from every voice that had told her she wasn't enough. She picked up her pen, not to sign, but to plan. If they wanted her story, she would give it to them. But it would be her version, not theirs. The next few weeks were a blur. Vivid's team moved fast, scheduling photo shoots, interviews, wardrobe fittings. Everywhere Maya went, eyes followed her. Some curious, some admiring, some jealous. Her social media grew overnight. Strangers called her brave, powerful, inspirational. But behind the scenes, whispers began to spread. Some of the other models weren't happy. They had worked for years and never been given the kind of attention Maya was now receiving. They muttered behind her back, calling her the Jinxie's diversity card. A token. At first, Maya ignored it. She had learned to silence that kind of noise. But soon, she noticed how the stylists altered her lighting during shoots. Always dimmer, always shadowed. She noticed how her skin tone was adjusted in post-production, softened, lightened, as if her darkness needed correction. When she brought it up, they brushed it off. "It's just the lighting," they said. "You look more marketable this way." The same words, dressed in modern clothing. One evening, after a long day of shooting, Maya overheard two executives talking near the hallway. Their laughter was casual, cruel. "She's perfect," one said. "Exactly what we needed. People will think we're inclusive now." Maya froze. The realization hit her like a punch. They hadn't changed. None of them had. They were using her face to prove they weren't the same people who once rejected her, while still rejecting her in every way that mattered. That night, she stood in front of the mirror again, the same reflection staring back, the same fire growing in her eyes. She wasn't going to let them own her image. Not again. But she needed proof, something undeniable. She began keeping notes, screenshots, recordings. Every time someone made a comment about her tone, every edited photo, every staged empowerment meeting, she documented everything. Weeks passed and the campaign launch drew closer. The agency was planning a massive unveiling. Her face would be on a billboard downtown. It was the same street she used to walk, dreaming of this moment. But this time, Maya had a plan of her own. The night before the launch, she sat alone at her desk, uploading something to her social media. A new post, one that told the real story, not the polished, marketable one they wanted to sell. It began with a single sentence. "They said I was too dark for their vision. Now they need my face to fix their conscience." And with that, she attached every piece of evidence she had gathered. The audio clips, the edited photos, the comments, the truth. She hit post. And then she waited. The post went live at midnight. By morning, it had set the internet on fire. At first, there was silence, the kind that comes before an explosion. Then the ripples began. Likes, shares, retweets. Comments from strangers, influencers, journalists. Screenshots spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the online world. The truth was out, and it was too raw, too detailed, too undeniable to be ignored. Maya watched it unfold from her small apartment, her phone vibrating non-stop on the table. Notifications flashed like fireworks. Her words were everywhere now. Headlines appeared within hours. Model exposes industry hypocrisy. Dark skin, bright truth. Vivid agency and diversity scandal. Every outlet wanted her side of the story. News anchors discussed her courage. Social media was divided. Some hailed her as a hero, others accused her of destroying her own career. But Maya didn't respond to any of it. Not yet. She sat still, hands clasped tightly, her stomach twisting in knots. She hadn't done it for attention. She had done it for freedom. Still, the consequences came fast. By noon, her contract with Vivid was suspended. They released a carefully worded statement. "We are deeply saddened by the misunderstanding. We remain committed to diversity." The same empty language she'd heard before. But it didn't matter anymore. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. By evening, former models began speaking up too. Women of color, plus-sized models, transgender models, all sharing their own stories of discrimination at the agency. For years, they had stayed silent, afraid of losing what little opportunity they had. But Maya's post cracked something open. It wasn't just about her anymore. It had become a movement. Inside Vivid's glossy walls, panic spread. Sponsors began pulling out. Clients withdrew deals. The CEO held emergency meetings while Ethan Hayes, the man who had once promised her redemption, found himself the target of a scandal he couldn't contain. But while the world debated and dissected her story, Maya felt only exhaustion. She hadn't slept since the post went up. Her phone was filled with messages, some of support, others filled with hate. Strangers called her brave, while others called her ungrateful, a troublemaker, a destroyer of her own success. And deep down, a small, terrified voice whispered, "What if they're right?" That night, she shut off her phone, unplugged her laptop, and walked outside. The city that had once looked golden now seemed gray and endless. She wandered through the streets, lost in thought, until she reached the old cafe where she used to work. It was closed now, the sign dark, the windows dusty. She pressed her hand against the glass, remembering the girl she had been back then, scared, quiet, invisible. Now everyone saw her. But visibility came with a price. The next morning, Maya woke to find news vans parked outside her building. Reporters shouted her name from the sidewalk. Neighbors peeked through their blinds. Her world, once so small, was suddenly too loud, too bright, too exposed. She stayed inside, curtains drawn. Every step forward came with backlash. There were rumors that she'd made up her story. Anonymous accounts tried to smear her name. One headline even claimed she was unstable and vindictive. The same voices that had dismissed her before were now trying to destroy her again. But then, the tide began to turn. A major magazine published an in-depth article verifying her claims, backed by multiple testimonies from other models. Evidence leaked showing years of discriminatory practices within VVD. Emails, texts, photos. It was undeniable. The agency's empire began to crumble, and amid all the chaos, something unexpected happened. A small, independent fashion brand reached out to her. They were new, ethical, and led by designers who believed in representation, not as a marketing tool, but as a mission. They wanted her to be the face of their first campaign. At first, Maya hesitated. She was tired of cameras, tired of being a symbol. But when she met the team, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: sincerity. They didn't want to rebrand her image. They wanted her story as it was, scars and all, so she agreed. The first shoot was nothing like the ones at VVD. No filters, no edits, no stage lights meant to hide her shade. They photographed her in natural light, her skin glistening under the sun, her hair wild and free. For the first time, she felt seen, truly seen. The campaign was titled Unfiltered. It launched quietly, without fanfare, but its impact was loud. The images went viral, not because of controversy, but because of authenticity. People connected to her strength, her honesty, her resilience. Then, one morning, she received an email she almost didn't believe. The same Billboard location that Vivid had reserved for their campaign, the one she was once supposed to appear on under their control, had been bought by the Unfiltered brand, and they wanted to use her photo. The irony was poetic. On the day of the reveal, Maya stood across the street, looking up as the giant sheet was lifted from the billboard. There she was, larger than life, unretouched, unafraid. The very face they once said was too dark for their vision now illuminated the skyline. People gathered on the sidewalk, snapping photos, cheering. Reporters shouted questions. But Maya didn't hear them. She only felt the wind against her face, carrying away the last traces of shame and fear. She had taken back her image, her story, her power. But just as she began to breathe again, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. A voice message played. "You think this is over, Maya? You cost us everything, and you're going to regret it." The sound froze her blood. The victory that had felt so pure now carried the shadow of something darker. The voice message replayed in her mind for days. Its tone was low, calm, but filled with something venomous, not rage, but intent. Maya tried to brush it off as an empty threat, just the bitterness of someone whose power had been taken away. But deep down, she knew better. Fame came with attention, and attention came with danger. At first, she ignored it. She threw herself into the Unfiltered campaign, attending shoots and small brand events, answering interviews where people called her the face of change. Her story was everywhere, featured in documentaries, college seminars, and podcasts about representation in media. Yet, while the world saw strength, Maya felt the quiet creep of paranoia. Strange things started happening. Emails from unknown accounts filled her inbox, threats disguised as advice, telling her to stop talking, to go back to where she belonged. Packages arrived at her apartment with no sender listed, containing nothing but blank paper. And once, late at night, she noticed a black car idling too long outside her building. She told herself she was overreacting. But the fear was real. Meanwhile, Vivid Agency was collapsing in public view. Ethan Hayes, once celebrated as a visionary, became the symbol of everything wrong with the industry. Lawsuits were filed. Former employees came forward. Sponsors cut ties, and his name became synonymous with hypocrisy. But power doesn't disappear quietly. Whispers began circulating online that someone was trying to discredit Maya. A fake leak surfaced, claiming she'd fabricated her story for publicity. It was quickly proven false, but the damage lingered. Trolls flooded her pages, accusing her of betrayal, of playing the victim card. The internet that had once celebrated her now turned toxic. She thought about quitting, disappearing from the spotlight, going somewhere no one knew her name. But she couldn't. Not after everything. Not when so many people looked up to her as proof that fighting back was possible. So she stayed. Her manager, a kind and grounded woman named Leela, convinced her to move temporarily to a new apartment under tighter security. It wasn't much, but it gave her space to breathe. She spent days painting again, something she hadn't done since childhood. Her canvases were full of deep tones and gold accents, a visual echo of her emotions, a mix of pain and healing. It was there, in that quiet studio, that a new opportunity found her. A global fashion house, one that had publicly stood behind her since the beginning, invited her to be part of an international campaign about beauty beyond color. It wasn't just another modeling gig. It was a statement, and they wanted her to lead it. The offer was life-changing: travel, creative freedom, a chance to represent millions of women like her. It felt like destiny, but just as she began preparing for it, things took a darker turn. One night, as she returned home from a small event, she found her door slightly ajar. The lock was scratched, the chain dangling. She froze. Every instinct screamed danger. Carefully, she pushed it open. Her paintings were slashed, her photographs torn, her computer smashed to pieces. And on her mirror, scrawled in red paint, were the words, "Stop before it's too late." Her knees nearly gave out. Police came, statements were taken, but there were no fingerprints, no witnesses. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing. Maya realized this wasn't random hatred. It was targeted. Someone was trying to break her spirit, to silence her without ever having to confront her in public. For days, she couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. But as fear gripped her, something else began to rise beneath it: anger. For too long, she had let others define her worth. For too long, she had been told she wasn't enough, not light enough, not quiet enough, not obedient enough. And now, even after she'd clawed her way to freedom, they wanted to take it back. She refused to let them. She contacted a private investigator to find out who was behind the harassment. What they discovered shocked her. The car that had been following her was registered to a shell company, one that had financial ties to Ethan Hayes' former legal team. It all connected. The calls, the threats, the break-in, orchestrated revenge from those who couldn't bear to lose power. But they had underestimated her resolve. Instead of retreating, Maya went public again. She shared the story of the break, in the threats and the investigation. She didn't name names, but she let the world know she wasn't afraid. The response was overwhelming. Support poured in from celebrities, activists, and global brands. Donations were raised for legal funds. Hashtags trended again, this time not in outrage, but in solidarity. The movement she had sparked months ago came alive once more, stronger than ever. Ethan Hayes was cornered. Leaked emails tied him directly to efforts to intimidate former models, Maya included. He was arrested for tampering with witnesses in an ongoing discrimination case. The agency was officially shut down. And for the first time, Maya slept peacefully, knowing the ghosts of her past were finally being buried. Weeks later, she stood on a runway in Paris under blinding white lights, wearing a flowing gold dress that shimmered like sunlight on dark skin. As the cameras flashed, she didn't pose for approval. She simply existed. Confident, unapologetic. The crowd erupted in applause. Backstage, her phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. It was from a global advertising company. They wanted to feature her as the centerpiece of their new campaign. A massive billboard in Times Square. The very dream she had once been told she'd never deserve. Her eyes welled up as she whispered to herself, a quiet promise carried only in her heart. She had survived the storm, and now the world would see the light she carried. But as the plane ticket to New York arrived, she noticed something strange in her inbox. A new message. No sender, no subject line. Just a single sentence. You may have won the battle, but the war isn't over. Her hand trembled as she stared at it. Was it a bluff or the beginning of something far more dangerous? The message haunted her. It wasn't just the words. It was the emptiness behind them. No name, no trace, no identity. It felt like a whisper from the shadows, a reminder that her victory still made someone furious enough to hide behind anonymity. Maya stared at her laptop screen, the glow painting her face in pale light. Every sound outside her apartment felt louder now. Every knock, every footstep, every passing car. She told herself it was paranoia, but deep down she knew better. She'd exposed an industry. She'd humiliated men who once believed themselves untouchable. And power, once wounded, often came back to bite. Still, she boarded the flight to New York a week later. Fear couldn't be her prison anymore. She'd spent too long letting other people's opinions dictate her worth. If she ran now, she would undo everything she had fought for. The campaign was massive. Her face would appear on one of the largest billboards in Times Square, a global symbol of defiance and beauty. The team behind it had worked for months, and the anticipation was electric. Maya tried to let the excitement wash away her fear, but it lingered, an invisible weight pressing on her chest. The first few days in New York were a blur of meetings, fittings, and rehearsals. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Strangers stopped to thank her, to say her story had inspired them. For the first time, Maya felt that her pain had a purpose. But even as the world celebrated her, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She noticed it first at the hotel. The same man in a gray jacket standing across the street 2 mornings in a row. He never looked directly at her, just lingered near the newsstand. Then, the messages started again, this time on a new phone number. Anonymous texts filled with veiled warnings, "You're playing with fire. You should have stayed silent." Her team urged her to ignore it, saying trolls often targeted public figures. But when her hotel keycard suddenly stopped working and the front desk claimed it had been deactivated, by mistake, Maya's unease grew into dread. That night, she packed her essentials and moved to a different hotel under a pseudonym. For a while, it gave her peace. But peace never lasted long in her story. 2 days before the Billboard unveiling, her manager Leela received a call from a reporter who claimed to have new evidence that Maya's story was fabricated. They sent over supposed documents and email threads, all fake, but disturbingly realistic. Someone had gone to great lengths to destroy her again. Leela was furious. Maya was numb. The fashion house stood by her, publicly denouncing the smear attempt. But behind the scenes, the tension was thick. Investors feared bad publicity. Brand partners whispered about delaying the campaign. It was happening all over again. Her truth being questioned, her success dangling on the edge of collapse. That night, unable to sleep, Maya walked through the streets of New York. Times Square shimmered with endless light. Faces, colors, advertisements screaming from every direction. She stood beneath the empty billboard that would soon bear her image, staring up at the blank canvas above. It was almost poetic, how something so massive could be so empty before it became alive. And then, suddenly, a small sound cut through the chaos. The click of a camera shutter. She turned sharply, scanning the crowd. Nothing, just tourists, vendors, taxis. But the hairs on her neck stood on end. Someone had taken her photo. The next morning, her inbox held proof. An image of her standing alone under the billboard, attached to an email with no sender. Below it, a line of text, "You don't belong there." Her hands trembled. Whoever was behind this wasn't just angry. They were close. Leela wanted to go to the police again, but Maya hesitated. Every time she'd tried before, there were no leads, no evidence. Whoever they were, they covered their tracks too well. Instead, Maya decided to face it head-on. She went to the unveiling as planned. Crowds filled Times Square. Cameras flashed. The tension in her chest pulsed like a heartbeat as the countdown began. 10:09 her image appeared, towering above the city. Her dark skin gleamed like gold under the lights, her eyes fierce, her expression proud. The audience erupted into cheers. Tears streamed down her face. It was more than a billboard. It was proof. Proof that she had survived every humiliation, every insult, every attempt to erase her. She had taken the very space that once rejected her and turned it into her throne. But amid the noise, Maya noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. A man in a gray jacket, just like before, watching her through the camera lens. Her chest tightened. She tried to push through the reporters, but when she reached the spot, he was gone, vanished. Later that evening, back in her hotel, she received a message that made her blood run cold. It was a photo, her billboard from earlier that day, but defaced. Someone had drawn red paint across her face in the picture, and attached beneath it, a video file. Her finger hovered over it, heart pounding. When she pressed play, static filled the screen. Then came a distorted voice, the same one from the voicemail weeks ago. "You think you've won," it said. "But people like you don't get happy endings. We'll remind you of your place." The screen went black. She stood frozen, the sound echoing in her ears. For the first time since her rise began, she felt powerless again. Not because of their words, but because she knew this wasn't just online hate anymore. Someone was coming for her, and she didn't know who. The video replayed in her mind all night, over and over. That distorted voice, that threat, it was like a ghost she couldn't exorcise. Maya didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker and fade as dawn approached. The world outside was moving on, celebrating her as a symbol of resilience. But inside her hotel room, she felt hunted. By morning, the story had exploded again. Someone had leaked the defaced Billboard photo online, and the public reacted with outrage. News anchors debated whether it was a hate crime. Strangers flooded her page with messages of support and fury. The campaign team increased security, assigning guards to her movements. But even surrounded by people, she felt alone. That afternoon, she met with the police again. They took the threats seriously this time, especially after the video. The footage was traced to a burner phone purchased in cash. No fingerprints, no leads. But a location ping revealed it had been active near her hotel multiple times over the past week. Whoever this was, they'd been close. Terrifyingly close. The officers suggested she leave the city until the investigation was over. But Maya refused. She wasn't running anymore. She'd spent her whole life running, from judgment, from rejection, from fear. Every time she was told she wasn't enough, she'd retreated, made herself smaller. But now her face loomed over one of the biggest cities in the world. That was her statement, her defiance. If she ran now, they'd win. The following days were a blur of chaos and headlines. Model targeted in hate attack. Industry scandal deepens. Everyone wanted her comment, her reaction, her tears. But Maya stayed silent. Instead, she focused on the one thing she could control, her message. She began documenting everything, creating a series of videos about her journey. She didn't name her stalker, didn't point fingers. She simply spoke her truth. About what it meant to live in a world that measured worth by shade. About the loneliness that came with being the first. About the courage it took to stand tall when others wanted you buried. Her voice trembled in the first recording, but with each upload she grew steadier, stronger. The internet, fickle as it could be, rallied around her again, this time not as an idol, but as a human being. And then, just when it seemed like the story had reached its breaking point, the truth surfaced. The police called late one night. They had found something. Security footage from a nearby parking structure showed a man entering the area minutes before the defaced Billboard photo appeared online. He wore a baseball cap and gloves, his face half hidden. But technology has a way of seeing through masks. After enhancing the footage, the police identified him. It was someone Maya had once trusted, a former assistant from Vivid Agency, a man who had worked under Ethan Hayes for years, managing the very campaigns that had excluded her. When Vivid collapsed, he lost everything, his career, his home, his connections, and he blamed Maya. The discovery was both a relief and a heartbreak. The man was arrested days later, caught trying to leave the city. His confession was messy and bitter. He claimed he'd never meant to hurt her, only to remind her of what she'd done. But behind those words was pure malice, the kind born from a lifetime of privilege suddenly stripped away. When Maya heard the news, she didn't feel victory. She felt sorrow. Hatred had eaten him alive, the same way it had almost eaten her spirit. She realized then that her real revenge had never been about exposing anyone or winning a campaign. It was about reclaiming her peace. Weeks passed. The billboard was restored, brighter than ever. The red paint was gone, replaced with fresh light. Her image remained strong, proud, and unshaken. One afternoon, she returned to Times Square alone. The crowd had moved on, the cameras gone. She stood beneath the massive photo, looking up in silence. It was strange to see herself that way, larger than life, almost mythical. The girl who had once been told she was too dark to stand under bright lights now illuminated one of the brightest places on earth. But she didn't feel untouchable. She felt human. A gust of wind brushed her hair as she whispered a quiet thank you. To her younger self, the one who hadn't given up. To her mother, who had taught her that beauty wasn't something granted, but something owned. And even to her enemies, who had shown her the depth of her own strength. She turned to leave, blending into the crowd. No one recognized her at first, just another face among thousands. But a young girl nearby suddenly stopped, eyes wide, pointing up at the billboard. She looked back and forth between the image and Maya, realization dawning. Her mother turned too, smiling softly. The little girl whispered something, awe shining in her eyes. Maya didn't need to hear it to know what she said. Because that was the point. The billboard wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were too dark, too different, too much to be beautiful. It was a mirror, one that reflected not just light, but dignity. That night, Maya packed her things quietly. She didn't need to stay in New York anymore. The message had already been delivered. Before leaving, she took one last look at the skyline from her window. The billboard glowed in the distance, casting a warm hue across the buildings. She smiled, not out of triumph, but peace. The war was over. And this time, she had won, not with vengeance, but with visibility. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't making them regret what they said. It was proving that their words had no power anymore. Maya turned off the light, picked up her bag, and stepped into the night. The world, for once, felt like it was finally ready to see her.